The Spouter Inn. Entering that gable-ended Spouter Inn, you found yourself in a wide, low, scraggly entry with old-fashioned wainscots, reminding one of the bulwarks of some condemned old craft. On one side hung the very large old oil painting, so thoroughly besmoked and every way defaced, that in the unequal crosslights by which you viewed it, it was only by diligent study and a series of systematic visits to it, and careful inquiry of its neighbors, that you could anyway arrive at an understanding of its purpose. Such unaccountable masses of shades and shadows that at first you almost thought, some ambitious young artist in the time of New England hags had endeavored to delineate chaos bewitched. But by dint of much and earnest contemplation and oft repeated ponderings, especially by throwing open the little window towards the back of the entry, you at last come to the conclusion that such an idea, however wild, might not altogether be unwarranted. But what most puzzled and confounded you was, in a long, limber, portentous, black mass of something hovering in the center of the picture of three blue, dim, perpendicular lines floating in a nameless yeast. A boggy, soggy, squitchy picture, truly enough to drive a nervous man distracted. Yet there was a sort of indefinite, half-attained, unimaginable sublimity about it that fairly froze you to it, till you involuntarily took an oath with yourself to find out what that marvelous painting meant. Ever and anon a bright but alas deceptive idea that would dart you through. It's the Black Sea in the midnight gale. It's the unnatural combat of the four primal elements. It's a blasted heath. It's a Hyperborean winter scene. It's the breaking up of the ice-bound stream of time. But at last these fancies yielded to that one portentous something in the picture's midst. That, once found out, and all the rest were plain. But stop, does it not bear the faint resemblance to a gigantic fish? Even the great Leviathan himself? In fact, the artist's design seemed this. A final theory in my own, partly based upon the aggregated opinions of many aged persons with whom I conversed upon the subject. The picture represents a Cape Horner in a great hurricane. The half-foundered ship weltering there with its three dismantled masts alone visible, and an exasperated whale, purposing to spring clean over the craft, is the enormous act of impaling himself upon the three mastheads. The opposite wall of this entry was hung all over with a heathenish array of monstrous clubs and spears. Some were thickly set with glittering teeth resembling ivory saws. Others were tufted with knots of human hair, and one was sickle-shaped, with a vast handle sweeping round like the segment you made in a new-mown grass by a long-armed mower. You shuddered as you gazed, and wondered what the monstrous cannibals and savage could have gone adept harvesting with such a hacking, horrifying implement. Mixed with these were the rusty old whaling lances and harpoons, all broken and deformed, and some were storied weapons. With this once long lance, and now wildly elbowed, 50 years ago did Nathan Swain kill 15 whales between a sunrise and sunset. And that harpoon, so like a corkscrew now, was flung in Jobin seas, and run away with it by a whale years afterwards, slain off the Cape of Blanco. The original iron entered nigh the tail, and like a restless needle sojourning in the body of a man, traveled full 40 feet, and at last was embedded in the hump. Crossing this dusky entry, and on through yon low arched way, cut through what in old times must have been a great central chimney with fireplaces all around, you entered the public room. A still duskier place as this, with such low ponderous beams above, and such old wrinkled planks beneath, that you would almost fancy you trod some old craft's cockpits, especially of such a howling night, when this corner-anchored old ark rocked so furiously. On one side stood a long, low, shelf-like table, covered with cracked glass cases, filled with dusty rarities gathered from this wide world's remotest nooks. Projecting from a further angle of this room stands a dark-looking den, the bar, a rude attempt at a right whale's head. Be that how it may, it stands there the vast arched bone of the whale's jaw, so wide the coach might have almost drive through beneath it. Within are shabby shelves, ranged around with old decanters, bottles, flasks, and on those jaws of swift destruction, like another cursed Jonah, by which name indeed they call him. Bustles a little withered old man, who for their money dearly sells the sailors deliriums and death. Abominable are the tumblers into which he pours his poison, though true cylinders within the villainous green goggling glasses deceitfully tapered downwards to a cheating bottom. Parallel meridians rudely pecked into the glasses. Surround these footpads goblets. Fill to this mark, and your charge is but a penny. To this a penny more, and so on to the full glass, the Cape Horn measure, which you may gulp down for a shilling. Upon entering this place, I found a number of young seamen gathered about a table, examining a dim, light diver's specimen of scrimshanter. I sought the landlord, and telling him I desired to be accommodated with a room, received for answer that his house was full, not a bed unoccupied. But vast, he added, tapping his forehead, you hain't no objections to sharing a harpooner's blanket, have ye? I suppose you are going a whaling, so you better get used to that sort of thing. I told him I never liked to sleep two in a bed, that if I ever should do so, it would depend on who the harpooner might be, and that if he, the landlord, really had no other place for me, the harpooner was not decidedly objectionable. Why, rather than wander full about a strange night on so bitter a night, I would put up with half of any decent man's blanket. I thought so. All right, take a seat. Supper? You want supper? Supper will be ready directly. I sat down on an old wooden settle, carved all over like a bench on the battery. At one end, the ruminating tar was still further adorning it with his jackknife, stooping over and diligently working away at the space between his legs. He was trying his hand at a ship under full sail, but didn't make much headway, I thought. At last, some 4 or 5 of us were summoned to our meal in an adjoining room. It was cold as Iceland, no fire at all. The landlord said he couldn't afford it. Nothing but 2 dismal tallow candles, each in a winding sheet. We were fain to button up our monkey jackets and hold to our lips cups of scalding tea with our half-frozen fingers. But the fare was of the most substantial kind, not only meat and potatoes, but dumplings. Good heavens, dumplings for dinner! One young fellow in a green box coat addressed himself to these dumplings in the most direful manner. My boy, said the landlord, you'll have the nightmare to a dead sartinty. Landlord, I whispered, that ain't the harpooner, is it? Oh, no, said he, looking a sort of diabolically funny. The harpooner's a dark-complexioned chap. He never eats dumplings, he don't. He eats nothing but steaks, and likes 'em rare. The devil he does, said I. Where is the harpooner? Where is he here? He'll be here before long, was the answer. I could not help it, but I began to feel suspicious of this quote-unquote dark-complexioned harpooner. At any rate, I made up my mind that if it so turned out that we should sleep together, he must undress and get into bed before I did. Supper over, the company went back to the bar room where, not knowing what else to do with myself, I resolved to spend the rest of the evening as a looker-on. Presently a riding noise was heard without. Starting up, the landlord cried, "That's the Krampus's crew. I see her reported in the offering this morning. A 3 years voyage, a full ship. Hurrah, boys, now we'll have the latest news from the Fijis." A tramping of sea boots was heard in the entry. A door was flung open and rose a wild set of mariners enough, enveloped in their shaggy watchcoats and with their heads muffled in woolen comforters, all but darn and ragged, and their beards stiff with icicles. They seemed an eruption of bears from Labrador. They had just landed their boat, and this was the first house they entered. No wonder, then, that they made a straight wake for the whale's mouth, the bar, when the wrinkled little old Jonah, there officiating, soon poured out brimmers all around. One complained of a bad cold in his head, upon which Jonah mixed him a pitch-like potion of gin and molasses, which he swore was a sovereign cure for all colds and catarrhs whatsoever. Never mind how long standing, or whether caught off the coast of Labrador or on the sea weather side of the ice island. The liquor soon mounted in their heads, and as it generally does, even with the errantest topers newly landed from sea, and they began capering about most obstreperously. I observed, however, that one of them held somewhat aloof, and though he seemed desirous not to spoil the hilarity of his shipmates by his own sober face, yet upon the whole he refrained from making as much noise as the rest. This man interested me at once, and since the sea gods had ordained that he should soon become my shipmate, though but a sleeping partner one, so far as this narrative is concerned, I will here venture upon a little description of him. He stood full 6 feet in height, with noble shoulders and a chest like a cofferdam. I've seldom seen such brawn in a man. His face was deeply brown and burnt, making his white teeth dazzling by the contrast, while in the deep shadows of his eyes floated some reminiscences that did not seem to give him much joy. His voice at once announced that he was a southerner, and from his fine stature, I thought he must be one of those tall mountaineers from the Alleghanian Ridge in Virginia. When the revelry of his companions had mounted to its height, this man slipped away unobserved, and I saw no more of him until he became my comrade on the sea. In a few minutes, however, he was missed by his shipmates, and being, it seems, for some reason a huge favorite with him, they raised a cry of "Bulkington! Bulkington! Where's Bulkington?" and darted out of the house in pursuit of him. It was now about 9 o'clock, and the room seemed almost supernaturally quiet after these orgies. I began to congratulate myself upon a little plan that occurred to me just previous to the entrance of the seamen. No man prefers to sleep two in a bed. In fact, you would a good deal rather not sleep with your own brother. I don't know how it is, but people like to be private when they're sleeping. And when it comes to sleeping with an unknown stranger, in a strange inn, in a strange town, and that stranger a harpooner, well, then your objections indefinitely multiply. Nor was there any earthly reason why I, as a sailor, should sleep two in a bed, more than anybody else, for sailors no more sleep two in a bed at sea than bachelor kings do ashore. To be sure, they all sleep together in one apartment, but you have your own hammock and cover yourself with your own blanket and sleep in your own skin. The more I pondered over this harpooner, the more I abominated the thought of sleeping with him. It was fair to presume that being a harpooner, his linen or his woolen, as the case might be, would not be of the tidiest, certainly not of the finest. I began to twitch all over. Besides, it was getting late, and my decent harpooner ought to be home and going bedwards. Suppose now he should tumble out upon me at midnight. How could I tell from what vile hole he had been coming? Landlord, I've changed my mind about that harpooner. I shan't sleep with him. I'd try the bench here. Just as you please. I'm sorry I can't spare ye a tablecloth or a mattress. It's a plaguey rough board here. Feel the knots of notches. But wait a bit, Scramshanter. I've got a carpenter's plane there in the bar. Oh, wait, I say. I'll make you snug enough. So saying, he procured the plane, and with his old silk handkerchief first dusting the bench, vigorously set to planning away my bed. The while grinning like an ape. The shavings flew right and left, till at last the plain iron came bump against an indestructible knot. The landlord was near spraining his wrist, and I told him for heaven's sake to quit. The bed was soft enough to suit me, and I did not know how all the planning in the world could make eater down of a pine plank. So gathering up the shavings with another grin and throwing them about into the great stove in the middle of the room, he went about his business and left me in a brown study. I now took the measure of the bench and found that it was a foot too short, but that could be mended with a chair. But it was a foot too narrow, and the other bench in the room was about 4 inches higher than the planned one. The plain one, so there was no yoking them. I then placed the first bench lengthwise about along the only clear space against the wall, leaving a little interval between, for my back to settle down in. But I soon found that there came such a draught of cold air all over me from under the sill of the window that this plan would never do at all, especially as another current from the rickety door met one of the window, and both together formed a series of small whirlwinds in the immediate vicinity of the spot where I had thought to spend the night. The devil fetched that harpooner, thought I would stop. Couldn't I steal a march on him, bolt his door inside, and jump into his bed, not to be awakened by the most violent knockings? It seemed no bad idea, but upon second thought I dismissed it. For who could tell but what the next morning, so soon I popped out of the room, that harpooner might be standing in the entryway, all ready to knock me down. Still looking around me again, and seeing no possible chance of spending a insufferable night unless in some other person's bed, I began to think that, after all, I might be cherishing unwarrantable prejudices against this unknown harpooner. Thinks I'll wait a while. He must be dropping in before long. I'll have a good look at him then, and perhaps we may become jolly good bedfellows after all. There's no telling. But though the other boarders kept coming in by ones, twos, and threes and going to bed, and yet no sign of my harpooner. Landlord, said I, what sort of chap is he? Does he always keep such late hours? It was now hard upon 12 o'clock. The landlord chuckled again with his lean chuckle, and seemed to be mightily tickled at something beyond my comprehension. No, he answered. Generally, he's as early as a bird. Early to bed or early to rise. Yes, he's the bird what catches the worm. But tonight he went out peddling, you see. And I don't see what on earth keeps him so late. Unless, maybe, can't sell his head. Can't sell his head? What sort of bamboozlingly story is this you are telling me? Getting into a towering rage. Do you pretend to say, landlord, that this harpooner is actually engaged in this blessed Saturday night, or rather Sunday morning, in peddling his head around this town? That's precisely it, said the landlord. I told him he couldn't sell it here. The market's overstocked. With what? Shouted I. With heads, to be sure. Ain't there too many heads in the world? Tell you what it is, landlord, said I quite calmly. You better stop spinning that yarn to me. I'm not green. Maybe not, taking out a stick and whittling a toothpick. But I rather, Yes, you'd be dumb brown if that heir's harpooner hears you a slander on his head. I'll break for him, said I, now flying into a passion against this unaccountable farrago of the landlord's. It's broke already, said he. Broke? Said I. Broke? What do you mean? Sartain. And that's the very reason he can't sell it, I guess. Landlord, said I, going up to him as cool as Mount Helka in a snowstorm. Landlord, stop whittling. You and I must understand one another. That two, without delay. I come to your house and want a bed. You tell me you can only give me half of one, and that the other half belongs to a certain harpooner. And about this harpooner, whom I have not yet seen, you persist in telling me the most mystifying and exasperating stories, tending to get me in an uncomfortable feeling toward the man who you designed for my bedfellow, a sort of connection landlord, which is an intimate and confidential one in the highest degree. I now demand of you to speak out and tell me who and what this harpooner is, and whether I shall be in all respects safe to spend the night with him. And in the first place, you will be so good at unsay that story about selling his head, which, if true, I take to be good evidence that this harpooner is stark mad, and I have no idea of sleeping with a madman. And you, sir, you, landlord, you, sir, by trying to induce me to do so knowingly, would thereby render yourself liable into a criminal prosecution. Wow, said the landlord, fetching a long breath. That's a pretty good long sermon for a chap that rips a little now and then. But easy. This here harpooner I've been telling you has just arrived from the South Seas, where he's brought up a lot of New Zealand heads. Great curios, and sold them all on but one. And that one he's trying to sell tonight. Because tomorrow, Sunday, it would not do to be selling human heads about the streets where folks is going to churches. He wanted to last Sunday, but I stopped him just as he's going out the door with the forehead strung on a string, for all the arth like a string of onions. This account cleared up the otherwise unaccountable mystery and showed that the landlord, after all, had no idea of fooling me. But at the same time, what could I think of a harpooner who stayed out on Saturday night clean into the Holy Sabbath, engaged in such a cannibal business as selling the heads of dead idolaters? Depend upon it, landlord, that harpooner is a dangerous man. He pays regular, was the rejoinder. But come, it's getting dreadful late, and you better be turning flukes. It's a nice bed. Sal and me slept in that air bed that night we were spliced. There's plenty of room for two to kick about in that bed. It's an almighty big bed, that. Why, before we give it up. Sal used to put our Sam and our little Johnny in the foot of it. But I got a dreaming and sprawling about one night, and somehow Sam got pitched on the floor and came near breaking his arm. Arter that, Sal said it wouldn't do. Come along here, I'll give you a glim in the chippy. And so saying, he lighted a candle and held it toward me, offering to lead the way. But I stood so irresolute when looking at a clock in the corner, he exclaimed, "I've it's Sunday. You won't see that harpooner tonight. He's come to an anchor somewhere. Come along then, do come along. Won't you come?" I considered the matter a moment, and then upstairs we went, and I was ushered into a small room, cold as a clam and furnished, sure enough, with a prodigious bed, almost big enough indeed for any 4 harpooners to sleep abreast. "There," said the landlord, placing the candle on a crazy old sea chest that did double duty as a washstand and a center table. "There, make yourself comfortable now, and good night to ye." I turned round from eyeing the bed, but he disappeared. Folding back at this counterpane, I stooped over the bed, though none of the most elegant, it yet stood the scrutiny tolerably well. I glanced around the room, and beside the bedstead was a center table, I couldn't see no other funeral furniture belonging to the place, but a rude shelf and four walls, and a papered fireboard representing a man striking a whale. Of things not properly belonging to the room, there was a hammock lashed up and thrown about the floor in one corner, although a large seaman's bag containing the harpooner's wardrobe, no doubt in lieu of a land trunk. Likewise, there was a parcel out of outlandish bonefish hooks on the shelf over the fireplace, and a tall harpoon standing on the head of the bed. What is this on the chest? I took it up, held it close to the lamplight, and felt it and smelt it, and tried every possible way to arrive at some satisfactory conclusions concerning it. I can compare it to nothing else but a large doormat, ornamented at its edges with little tinkling tags, something like its stained porcupine quills around an Indian moccasin. There was a little hole or slit in the middle of this mat, and as you can see, there's some South American ponchos. But could it be possible that any sober harpooner would get into that doormat and parade the streets of any Christian town in that sort of a guise? I put it on to try, and weighed me down like a hamper, being uncommonly shaggy and thick, and I thought a little damp, as though this mysterious harpooner had been wearing it of a rainy day. I went up to it, and a bit of glass struck against the wall, and never saw such a sight in my life. I tore myself out of it in such a hurry that I nearly gave myself a kink in the neck. I sat down on the side of the bed and commenced thinking about this head-peddling harpooner and his doormat. After thinking of some time on the bedside, I got up and took off my monkey jacket, and then stood in the middle of the room thinking. I then took off my coat and thought a little more of my shirt sleeves, but beginning to feel very cold now, half undressed as I was, remembering what the landlord said about the harpooners not coming home tonight at all that night, it being very so late, I made no more ado, but jumped out of my pantaloons and boots, and then blowing out of the light, tumbling in the bed, and commenced myself to the care of heaven. Whether that mattress was stuffed with corn cobs or broken crockery, there was no telling, but I rolled about a good deal, and could not sleep for a long time. At last I slid off into a light doze, and had pretty nearly made it for good offing towards the land of Nod, when I heard a heavy footfall in the passage, and saw a glimmer of light come into the room from under the door. Lord, save me, thinks I, that must be the harpooner, the infernal head peddler. But I lay perfectly still, and resolved not to say a word till spoken to. Holding a light in one hand, and that identical New Zealand head in the other, the stranger entered the room, and without looking toward the bed, placed his candle a good ways off from me in the floor of one corner, and then began working away at the knotted cords of the large bag I before spoke of in being in the room. I was all eagerness to see his face, but he kept it averted for some time while employed in unlacing the bag's mouth. This accomplished, however, he turned round, when, good heavens, what a sight, such a face! It was of a dark, purplish, yellow color here and there, stuck over with large, blackish-looking squares. Yes, just as I thought, he's a terrible bedfellow. He's been in a fight, got dreadfully cut, and here he is, just from the surgeon. But at that moment he chanced to turn his face so toward the light that I plainly could see they could not be sticking plasters at all, those little black squares on his cheeks. They were stains of some sort of other. At first I knew not what to make of this, but soon an inkling of truth occurred to me. I remember a story of the white man, a whaleman too, who, falling along among the cannibals, had been tattooed by them. I concluded that this harpooner, in the course of his distant voyages, must have met with a similar adventure. And what is it? Though, thought I, after all, it's only his outside. A man can be honest in any sort of skin. But then, what to make of his unearthly complexion? that part of it, I mean lying around about and completely independent of the squares of tattooing. To be sure, it might be nothing but a good coat of tropical tanning, but I never heard of a hot sun tanning a white. But I never heard of a hot sun tanning a white man into a purplish yellow one. However, I had not been in the South Seas, and perhaps the sun there produced these extraordinary effects upon the skin. Now, while all these ideas were passing through me like lightning, this harpooner never noticed me at all. But after some difficulty having opened his bag, he commenced fumbling in it, and presently pulled out a sort of tomahawk and a sealskin wallet with a heroin. Placing these on the old chest in the middle of the room, he then took out the New Zealand head, a ghastly thing enough, and crammed it down in the bag. He now took off his hat, a new beaver hat, when I came nigh singing out with fresh surprise. There was no hair on his head, none to speak of at least, nothing but a small scalp knot twisted up on his forehead. His bald purplish head now looked for all the world like a mildewed skull. Had not the stranger stood between me and the door, I would have bolted out of it quicker than I could ever have bolted at dinner. Even as it was, I thought something was slipping out of the window, but it was the second floor back. I'm no coward, but what to make of this head-peddling purple rascal altogether passed my comprehension. Ignorance is the parent of fear, and being completely nonplussed and confounded by a stranger, I confess I was now as much afraid of him as if it was the devil himself who had thus broken into my room at the dead of night. In fact, I was so afraid of him that I was not game enough just then to address him and demand a satisfactory answer concerning what seemed inexplicable in him. Meanwhile, he continued his business of his undressing, and at last showed his chest and arms. As I live, these covered parts of him were checkered with the same squares as his face. His back, too, was all over with the same dark squares. He seemed to have been in the 30 Years' War, and just escaped from it with a sticking plaster skirt. Still more, his very legs were marked as if a parcel of dark green frogs were running up the trunks of young palms. It was now quite plain that he must be some abominable savage or other shipped aboard a whaleman in the South Seas, and so landed in this Christian country. I quaked to think of it. A peddler of heads, too, perhaps the heads of his own brothers. He might take a fancy to mine. Heavens, look at that tomahawk. There was no time for shuddering, and for now the savage went about something that completely fascinated my attention. It convinced me that he must indeed be a heathen. Going to his heavy grego, or rapal, or dreadnought, which he had previously hung on a chair, he fumbled in the pockets and produced at length a curious little deformed image with a hunch on its back, and exactly the color of a 3 days old Congo baby. Remembering the involved head, at first I thought this black mannequin was a real baby, preserved in some similar manner, but seeing that it was not at all limber, that it glistened a good deal like polished ebony, I concluded it must be nothing but a wooden idol, which indeed it proved to be. For now the savage goes up to the empty fireplace and, removing the papered fireboard, sets up this little hunchback image like a 10-pin between the andirons. The chimney jabs and all the bricks inside were very sooty, so that I thought this fireplace made a very appropriate little shrine or chapel for his Congo idol. I now screwed my eyes hard toward the half-hidden image, feeling but ill at ease meantime to see what next to follow. He first takes about a double handling of shavings out of his grego pocket and places them carefully before the idol, and then laying a bit of ship biscuit on top of applying the flame from his lamp, he kindled the shavings into a sacrificial blaze. Presently, after many hasty snatches into the fire, he still hastier withdraws of his fingers, whereby he seems to be scorching them badly. He at last succeeded in drawing out the biscuit and blowing off the heat and ashes a little. He made a little polite offer to the little Negro. the little devil did not seem to fancy such dry sort of fare at all. He never moved his lips. All these strange antics were accompanied by still stranger guttural noises from the devotee, who seemed to be praying in a sing-song or else singing some pagan psalmody or other, during which his face twisted about in the most unnatural manner. At last extinguishing the fire, he took the idol up very unceremoniously and bagged it again in his grego pocket, as carefully as if he were a sportsman bagging a dead woodcock. All these queer proceedings increased my uncomfortableness, and seeing him now exhibiting strong symptoms of concluding his business operations, and jumping into bed with me, I thought this was high time, now or never, before the light would be out, to break the spell into which I had been so long bound. But the interval I spent deliberating what to say was a fatal one. Taking up his tomahawk from the table, he examined the head of it for an instant, and holding out to light with his mouth at the handle, he puffed out great clouds of tobacco smoke. The next moment, the light was extinguished, and this wild candle, tomahawk between his teeth, sprang into bed with me. I sang out. I could not help it now, and gave it a sudden grunt of astonishment. He began feeling me. Stammering out something, I knew not what, I rolled out away from him against the wall, and then conjured him, whoever or whatever he might be, to keep quiet, and let me get up and light the lamp again. But his guttural responses satisfied me at once that he but ill comprehended my meaning. "Who devil you?" he at last said. "You no speaky, damn, I kill ye." And so saying, the lighted tomahawk began flourishing about me in the dark. "Landlord, for God's sake, Peter Coffin!" shouted I. "Landlord, watch Coffin, angels, save me!" "Speaky, tell me who ye be, or damn me, I kill ye," again growled the cannibal, while his horrid flourishings of the tomahawk scattered the hot tobacco flashes about me, till I thought my linen would get on fire. But thank heaven, at that moment the landlord came into the room, light in hand, and leaping from the bed, I ran to him. "Do not be afraid now," said he, grinning again. "Queequeg here wouldn't harm a hair on your head." "Stop your grinning," shouted I, "and why didn't you tell me the infernal harpooner was a cannibal?" "I thought ye'd know it, didn't I tell ye? He was a peddling heads around town. But turn flukes again and go to sleep. Queequeg, look here, you sabby me, I sabby you. This man's sleepy, you. You sabby?" "Me sabby plenty," grunted Queequeg, puffing away at his pipe and sitting up in bed.